What's going on, guys? Lobo, what's going on? It's a short week. I think today it was quite an interesting day to say the least, though. But hopefully you guys enjoyed your holiday weekend. Came back refreshed, came back with some more capital to pretty much dump into this market. But it's been quite an interesting day to really start the week. I did not expect it to start with this kind of volatility in terms of a gap down and then what we would consider to be what a beautiful trend day. As we like to usually say, especially those of you that are scalpers, when you have such a beautiful trend day today, it's literally just to like buy, sit, and just hold and just watch the market do its thing. What's going on, AA? So again, no, hopefully you guys enjoyed the 4th of July, beautiful weekend. I pretty much took a lot of the weekend to just relax and kind of just refresh my brain, just come back relaxed and just just taking it day by day right now. I did not really look at a chart since probably about Friday night. So I kind of took about 3 days off, just pretty much not looking at charts because obviously we get so caught up in looking at charts day to day, whether it be morning, night, any time of the day. So I just took about 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and literally just did not even look at a chart at all. Came back today though. I think the newsletter plays that I wrote roughly, I think that was around Friday night or so. That was literally bangers, and the best part was that one of my newsletters, literally Avery walked you through it from start to finish, right out the get go, the opening of the market. That was a beautiful one that hit just beautifully today. That was Roblox. So I'll get to that chart in just a quick second. But that newsletter play was just a banger off the rip. And then my second one is literally just playing out textbook right now as well. Today you had a nice little drop. It gave you the beautiful dip buy opportunity. I called out that level on live here this morning from my second newsletter play, and it literally just ripped right off of that level and never looked back. So that was another one. So it's good to start off the week like that when your newsletter play is literally just kick butt right off the get go on the first day of the week. So that was a good sign as well. But kind of getting into SPY here real quick so we can kind of get to the points. As you see, I have a nice little pink box kind of highlighted here, and that's basically what we've been sitting in since June 29th. We've been in this little box, and right now, into the close of the market here today, you can see that we're kind of just peaking right outside of that box right there, as we may end up signaling for more upside here coming into tomorrow. Now, it's a little bit hard pressed to believe that. I mean, I've been on the case where I say usually short the rips. Now, it just depends whether this rip actually has a little bit more legs. And the reason why I say that it may end up having more legs is because historically, this particular week after July 4th, we've been relatively bullish. That's really what the case has been. This entire week has relatively been a bullish week on a historical basis. Now, the flip side to that is that we can also say that this is not the same circumstances as we basically broken a multi-year bull run that we've had. So it's a little bit more of a give and take right now. I do definitely want to see here tomorrow morning. Do we end up getting the breather in which we see us pretty much test the bottom of the box on now? In which we get a flip side and give back all of today's gains, which has been mostly the story in this entire downtrend? Or do we see those legs as I'm pretty much explaining, just going over the tip of this top of the box here, over this 382 mark, if you want to say, to be the ballpark? Do we get a continuation? In which case, we go back to this famous anchored view up that I have from our COVID lows. That's sitting at 384.33, which is where I would expect us to stretch up towards if we get more legs to the upside here. So that's pretty much the level that I'm gonna be very keen on. If we do see market green and open tomorrow, do we get over that 384.33 mark and we continue to see uh, a bigger push? In which case, then we'll start talking about our high that we put in from June 28th. That's sitting at the 393 and ultimately going for 400 on SPY, right? Otherwise, again, the biggest line in the sand in the middle of this box that I think we've had for the past few days has been this 377 level. As you see, that's been literally your just like your median here, whether you broke north or south on this little box. So under 377, that's where I would say particularly you look to short, and you look to maybe make range towards the bottom of the box at this 372 half, and possibly even make break south of the box. So 377 though, that's the line in the sand to me tomorrow for the downside, in which I want to see us break under, and then potentially target 372 half. Otherwise, you look to hold the level that we closed at, and you look to make a push towards an anchor view up at 384.33, and then we start to make the next leg up towards our next anchor view up from our lows of May 20th, and that is going to be pushing up towards 389 half. And ultimately, everyone and their mom is basically going to be calling for 400 on SPY, which is going to be that mental number, if you want to say. All right. So that's pretty much just the flip side of both areas. If we really do start to bleed toward the end of the week, I mean, obviously breaking below this box here, that 372 half, but then you be targeting this gap fill that you have that's still incomplete towards your high here of that's sitting on that gap fill. You'll be completing at 369. All right. So that definitely be a level of completing the gap fill, but ultimately I would expect to come crashing down towards 367 half on the completion of that gap fill. And that would be more so if the market rolls over, and today was definitely a fluke as we have seen in this overall downtrend. All right. So that's the flip side, north and south. One name that kind of caught my attention here was still looking at Apple. If we're actually looking at Apple, you had a nice little rising wedge. You want to see a little leading diagonal action. We had the breakdown ultimately going in from last week. That was from the 30th. And we see just the V-shaped recovery that we've gotten from that 133 high. Beautiful push that we got out of that one today, even though we had that early drop. You saw the early, basically the entire rally that we had from the bottom. But we basically sitting at the retest of that rising wedge as a resistance. So this is going to be an interesting one. I would anticipate that 142 is going to be your resistance here on Apple. Even if it kind of opens green, it should only be about a 40 to 50 cent move to the north tomorrow, in which that 142 should act as a resistance. And that should end up coming down. Otherwise, if we end up reclaiming this resistance and we break north, now we're flirting with the bigger downtrend that you see. That's going to end up putting us up towards 144 half. And that's going to be where things start to get interesting. And you're going to start to see SPY. I was looking at towards that upper anchored view up. That's when we're going to start to really see things start to push. So I'm going to look for this one. That 144 half is going to be an interesting level if we continue to push north of 142. But otherwise, I would expect a breakdown. Our breakdown level would be under 138. And that's when I would start to basically target the low that we have from June 30th at that 133 spot. And then you have a little microscopic gap here, right around the 133 low. So that's north and south of Apple, but just a peculiar spot right into resistance here, roughly into the close. So that's going to be one I kind of keep an eye on here into tomorrow. Another one I wanted to point out was also AMD. We saw the strength out of semis here today a little bit earlier on. That was actually something that caught my attention as well. And the reason why AMD was particularly fond, well, I was fond of it, is because we ended up filling the gap that dates back towards basically we touched that gap fill basically dating back to July of 2020, in which we sat right into the middle of that gap. We barely breached it into that. Obviously, it doesn't conclude until about the 70 level, in which obviously it does show that we have more downside potentially, but it actually smacked right into that July 27th high, into the middle of that gap fill. So that was a peculiar spot right around that 71 high. That was a beautiful spot in which you saw that V-shaped recovery. Now, where would I expect us to basically see a your resistance here? It will be right around the 77 mark, so maybe roughly about another $2 upside potentially. I would expect to smack resistance around that 77 level, and that should start to see a reversal back to the downside. But you also do have earnings coming up, so that's something that's going to be key as well. So maybe potentially we see this kind of give us a little bit of a chop. So I wouldn't be too quick to necessarily short it, but just the spot that we saw the reversal today, that was pretty much what caught my attention. So I'll look to see how it reacts at that $77 level tomorrow, and that's the big level that you want to watch going into tomorrow is that $77 level. All right, so we'll see if that ends up acting as that resistance, or do we continue to see more legs to the north. All right. Someone mentioned Aman, what's going on? Square broadening wedge. I'll take a look at it real quick. Herbie Meta. I'll take a look at that one for you as well. I guess I'll start with square. Let's take a peep at square. And I did not realize I actually have this one highlighted already. So basically, you had a nice little downtrend break. That's exactly what I was looking at when I had highlighted. I did not realize that it actually broke that downtrend today, in particular. So that was a good sign. Now, if I was to say where you want to basically see this break over, is you're going to be looking for this to break over 71. Otherwise, that should act as your overhead supply, your resistance spot at that 71, which is still roughly about a $5, close to a $5 move to the upside. But 71 should be your resistance. That's particularly where you want to see this break north of. You break north of that 71 spot, then you're basically looking up towards 75 half is potentially what I'm looking at in continuation. Otherwise, if this ends up being a fake out potentially, then I would look to see if this breaks back under 63, and that's where I would go back to being short. All right. But this is definitely a beautiful one. You got that beautiful breakout, that downtrend. Just watch for this one to continue to hold that 65 half. You hold 65 half, you should get your continuation into that 71 level resistance. And that'll be a beautiful one. So I do like Square in particular. This is just a beautiful one. So I would stay and remain on that one. Just keep that $63 level as your invalidation level. The other one you mentioned was Meta. Let's take a peep on Meta. Meta was a beautiful one. I think me and Mambo were in Meta here earlier on today. That was just a beautiful rip. I did not expect it to be that strong. So, of course, I did sell it a bit early. I did not expect this kind of impulse to pretty much extend that much. But that was just a banger today. As you can see on the 4 hour here, you have a beautiful little wedge action. When we kind of looked at it, I was not expecting to go right up to the resistance. I was expecting to find that resistance right around that low 166 to 167 mark, and I did sell a little bit early. But what a push this ended up having right into that resistance. As you heard me say, Apple right into resistance. This is another one right into that downtrend resistance as well. So we're gonna look to see if Meta here can pretty much extend its rally. Watch the break over 169 half. You get a break over 169 half. Then we can start to stretch this out towards 172. All right. So that's going to be a beautiful one. Otherwise, if this starts to roll back over to the downside here, watch the short under 166. And that'll be when we start to see this start to roll over under that 166 level. And potentially your first PT here will be up to 162. All right, but this is another one right into a resistance similar to how Apple was, both right into resistance at the close of the market. All right. Let's see what else. Renee, you said APRN. I have not looked at that ticker in ages. Definitely has been a while since I looked at this one, and that's probably because it's a penny stock now. But beautiful downtrend break. I think that's the first thing that kind of just stood out to me right now. That was a beautiful downtrend break. Hopefully you caught that one. It had a nice little descending broad and wedge action, I would say. That was just a beautiful move out of this. I do expect this to have a little bit more upside. The only thing I would watch for potentially is maybe a little bit of a pullback, a little bit of a support test, if you want to say. But if I'm looking for that support test to pretty much be what level in particular, you kind of got that level. It looks like it's already kind of just retested it. But I would look for it to basically hold that $4 and a half, 450 mark. You hold that 450 mark, then you're potentially looking at making ways up towards $6. So it's about another $2 move to the upside here. You have a tiny little small gap fill here over this 5.92 spot, but that $6 mark should be a magnet, and that's roughly about another. Well, it's at 480, so about $1.20 would be your potential upside towards that $6 mark. If you do get continuation over the $6 mark, then that's when you're going to particularly look for a little bit of a resistance here at 6. That would be 6.88. Above the 6.88 spot, this is a beautiful gap that you have right here. I will say that. So I would leave runners if it can break over that $6 mark. I think that's where you start to leave runners. But you do have a beautiful gap that's sitting here over the $7.33, and that doesn't complete until just shy of for $8, 8.14 to be exact. So that's a beautiful one, Renee. If you're in that one, I would keep it. But the only thing is that if you have multiple contracts, multiple shares, I would say unload most of it at that $6 mark, and then leave your runners potentially for that gap fill of up to $8. All right, but that's a beautiful one. I'm glad you actually caught that one. I did not see this. I haven't looked at the ticker since it really became a penny stock, particularly, but that was a beautiful catch on your part. All right. Let's see, Aman, what's going on? You're talking about Airbnb. Let me take a peep. Let's see what Airbnb. Today, I gotta say though, we had a lot of growth names in particular. That saw a lot of beautiful movement. I think there was one that even stood out today Carvana. That thing was up like $5 in a day. Literally went up nonstop all day. If you would have told me that they was gonna do that, I definitely would have said you're probably crazy because that stock is literally dead. But that's the case. I mean, a lot of growth stocks that had relatively been dead for multiple months now. I want to say for most of this year. But a lot of them came alive today, and that was definitely good to see. Let's take a look, see what Airbnb is doing here right now. You had a nice little double bottom action. So that definitely gave the sign here. You had a double bottom dating back from June 30th, and then you put in that bottom here relatively today. If I'm looking for further upside here in particular, you're essentially looking at this to pretty much hold above this 95, 94 half. As long as you hold above 94 half, I would look for this tiny gap fill to be completed here over this $97 mark. That completes at 97.09, so it's about a few cents of a gap fill. But if I'm particularly looking for my overhead resistance, I would look for this at 99. 99 would be my overhead resistance. If you can break over the $99 mark, then your next level of resistance that I will particularly be watching is 102 half. So 99 and 102 half is particularly your two upside targets that you're watching as your resistance. But then again, also holding to make sure that you can maintain over this 94 half. Otherwise, this starts to roll back over, and your first PT will basically be at 92 half, and then you will potentially come back down towards 89 half. All right, but this is a beautiful one. Let's see how much more legs the pretty much the growth sector itself has. A lot of these growth names are actually breaking downtrends relatively. So let's see how much more legs they have. But that's also going to be on the aspect of the broader market, because if the broader market basically gives back all of what today's price action is, I would expect these growth stocks also to come right back in to the downside as well. All right. So definitely keep an eye on the broader market, but it's a good sign to see the growth names actually coming back alive today. Let's see what else. Wiley, can I look at DVN? Why not? Let's take a peep. See what DVN is doing. That got being up today. So energy did not do so hot today. Let's see if we can stretch out towards the daily. Let's see where our potential support is that we have. Let's see. Yeah, I would roughly say right around the spot would be where your support is. You kind of came a little bit close to it, but you might see a little bit more of a dip here come tomorrow morning. I think that $50 level smack on almost. It should be roughly right around 50.14 would be that exact spot in your support that I would expect to find buyers, and we should see a reversal. But 50.14, that's the spot that you look to see if you get a little bit more further downside here come tomorrow morning. You look to see if we can hold that 50.14 spot. If you can't hold 50.14, then we start to look towards where our prior breakout level, in which case this is going to be a further breakdown that's going to continue to escalate to the downside. And below that 50.14, you literally see where your prior breakout point was. And that basically dates back towards January of this year, in which you had a beautiful trendline resistance and you broke out of this level, this 45 half roughly. If you want to say 45 half should end up acting as your next major support level if you can hold 50.14. So that's ideally what I would say. If you can hold the 50.14, then you should get a retest. I would say targeting 53. Uh, just to be safe. Above the 53 level, then your next level that you're particularly watching will be 55 half. All right, but 50.14, that's the number that you want to particularly watch here going into tomorrow. Let's see what else. AAJ&J, that's another name I haven't looked at in quite a bit. Let's take a peep at it. Nothing that stands out particularly, if I want to say that. It looks a little bit more like you have a little megaphone action going on, if I'm being honest with you. If I want to say your resistance, you can pretty much tap your resistance, and you should end up also having nice little descending broad and wedge type action going on. And I could probably stretch this out. Let's see if this actually stretches out. Yeah, it should stretch right there. So a little bit of a descending broad and wedge type action that you have going on with J&J. Nothing that I'm too fond of, if I want to say that. If I'm looking for the upside here, you're looking to basically make a push over this 181 mark, which will put you closer to the downtrend resistance at 182 high. Roughly to be, if I want to say being more exact, it will be 182.76. 182.76 would be where you want to look for the break of the downtrend resistance here, but you're in a peculiar spot where you're so close into the resistance. I would say you definitely want to have a tight stop loss for the upside here if you're trying to get right in at the spot that you're currently sitting at. But I would say look for a break over that 181 to get closer to the resistance, and you kind of get that big break right over that 183 spot roughly. Otherwise, I do think that you have a little bit more downside. If I want to say particularly, I think you can actually come back and retest this 173 level, if I'm being honest with you. And that might end up being a better spot to particularly get a little bit of an inverted head and shoulders action potentially. So you might have a little bit of a left shoulder here. You have the head at the bottom of this wedge. And what you may end up doing is making a steeper right shoulder to come down to that 170, 173 and then curl right back up. So that's something I would be cautious about, but you might be making a little bit of an inverted head and shoulders. But I would watch the 173 test here to pretty much get a steeper right shoulder in particular. But a little bit of a peculiar spot, I would wait to see something a little bit more clearly. Right now, you feel like you're just smack middle of this little wedge. Otherwise, I would, if you want to be really safe, especially in this kind of market environment, wait for the 183 break on the downtrend break, and then that I would play the north. All right. But a little bit of a tough spot to kind of say if I'm bullish or bearish on that one. I would kind of favor that you get a steeper right shoulder in which you come down to retest 173. All right. Let's see what else you guys were talking about. Lobo, can I take a look at shop? Sure, why not? I haven't looked at shop since that stock split. I mean, I haven't been too much of a fan of it. I think the premiums, the strikes, what they did with that, it kind of literally just destroyed the entire thing right now. So I haven't been too fond of it. I gotta look back at the option chain, see how it actually moves, if it is fluently or not. But just looking right off the bat, kind of seeing that support to resistance kind of test right now, I would see if shop can break over this 35 mark. If you can break north of the 35 mark, then we can start talking about breaking over the $40 mark because 40 has actually been where it's had its basically your overhead resistance through this entire chop that you've had for I want to say multitude of days dating back towards May 6th. So unless you can end up potentially breaking this $40 level, I don't think you're potentially going anywhere. But if you break over 35, I think that's good enough room from 35 testing up to 40, which is roughly about a $5 move that you're looking at there, El Lobo. So you break over the 35, you got a $5 move to the upside for your multi-day resistance at $40. Otherwise, I would look to potentially see if this ends up acting as a resistance at 35, and that may end up actually being a potential short right back to your low of this 29.5. All right. So I would just play it off of this $35 mark. If you break north, you go bullish. You reject 35, you stay. You basically remain bearish. All right. But this is not particularly. This is more like a. If you have your defined levels like this, it actually is beautiful. Just play that direct movement north and south. But if you're looking for that big swing, that big move, yeah, you're literally sitting in a very multi-day box that you're sitting in right now. All right. And that's how I would go about that. Other than that, I think I covered all the names that you guys kind of mentioned. One thing I did want to point out, I know this is a short week. I think we have FOMC minutes tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. I'll double check and probably announce that on live tomorrow. I do have to double check. The other thing that the market is also currently waiting on is we do have job numbers coming out on Friday, so that's going to be pretty big for the market. The other thing is that we do also have basically our bank earnings kickoff as we go into earnings season here within basically your second to third week of July here. We do have earnings kicking off with the banks, then we have the airlines, and then of course, right into the end of the month is where we basically have a lot of our mega cap tech stocks. So that's just something to keep in mind. When is going to be potentially the run up? That's going to be the question mark. I would expect that we see some life out of a lot of these tech names before earnings because I don't particularly expect a lot of these tech names to hold up on the back end of earnings, in which that's where I think we are going to see the major rollover. I think it's going to be on the back end of a lot of these earnings. For example, Tesla today, I mean, we all saw that bad news that we had off of their quarterly delivery numbers that the market posed it to be. We saw the shutdown of, I think, one or two of their factories as well that it was causing issues. But with numbers like that being kind of on a down sentiment, you would not have expected it to rip as much as it did, being down, I think, what, $12 earlier on in the morning at the opening bell, and then to just rip $17. I did not expect that. But the other thing is that I don't expect the stock to necessarily roll over until we likely end up having earnings. So that's just something. Don't kind of force the situation just yet. Do I think that maybe we end up potentially closing this week on the downside? I do particularly expect that possibly, and then maybe we end up seeing the tech names kind of maybe into next week or the following week we see them get maybe their earnings run up. That's just kind of just a thought process, but just going day by day right now until we see that these actually get a little bit more legs, we see a little bit more of a continuation on their downturn breaks. I'm still leaning a little bit more on the bear side. That today was more so a little bit more of a fluke. But that's just still playing it day by day right now. Because I am relatively cash for most of the nights here. I think for this week, being the fact that it is relatively a short week, I do not want to get my premiums eaten up on a short week, especially. So I would preferably just rather day trade. As today was definitely one of those days where it was phenomenal to day trade with just a beautiful trend day. All right. But other than that, I think I'll wrap it up there. Let's see what the market wants to give us tomorrow. Let's see if we get that continuation to the north. A lot of great pushes today. Growth names were definitely the highlight of the day to me, in my opinion. But the tech names just, I mean, beautiful trend for all of them. Microsoft, Apple, Tesla, semis in general. I think semis will actually be something you want to look at as well tomorrow. Let's see if we can see back-to-back rally on the semis. Or was today again, like I said, is today a fluke? Especially looking at semis going into tomorrow. All right. But other than that, appreciate you guys joining. I will see you guys on live tomorrow morning. But appreciate you guys.